Nising ba sa kantinan prengnam ar sa kantikon namsak so agaro news kulrukpis niona.
Yes, I mean I don't see a big diversion. I don't see Mr. Modi diverting very much from our approach with the US, and I don't see ourselves changing direction very much from what he's doing. So I see continuity there. I think everybody on both sides of the equation, everybody does accept the fact that the India-US relationship is key for both countries.
Okay. One more.
Somebody said, somebody misquoted me yesterday saying that I'm against reservations. I've been saying again and again and again, we're going to increase reservations beyond 50%, and I'm not against reservations. There are two elements. The first is the defense cooperation, which is important, and I think we do a good job there. But then the second is what I touched on just now, which is China has placed in front of us a vision for production and prosperity in a non-democratic environment. Right? What is our response? Are we simply going to just sit there and say, okay, China can be the producer of the world and we're not going to do anything? Or do we have a response? What is our response to the Belt and Road? Right? I don't see one. So to me, that's really where US and India cooperation needs to go. How can we provide a democratic vision of production, of manufacturing that actually works to the rest of the world? And I think both countries bring different things to the table. And I think there's a huge opportunity there.
Okay.
Put it that 90% of India is either tribal, lower caste, or Dalit, right, or minority. And their participation in the governance of the country, in the various institutions of the country, in the media of the country is lacking. And so what we propose is a survey to make transparent the reality of how power is shared in India.
The caste census.
The caste census.
Okay. But just to stay on the same topic, all the secretaries are from the administrative service, correct? Now, the US Treasury has economists, the UK Treasury recruits people separately with expertise in economic policy making. But the Indian Finance Ministry is the domain of IAS officers, of which very few understand finance. Will you professionalize the Finance Ministry, liberate it from IAS officers who criticize it, and appoint a Dalit scholar like B.R. Ambedkar as
No, I
Finance
think that, look, the problem is much broader than that. Okay, the problem is about participation of weaker sections of lower castes, in particular Dalits, across the board. Right. So I'll shock you by saying that if you were to look at the top 200 corporates in India, and you were to look at their management teams, and you were to look at their CEOs, you wouldn't find anybody from the lower caste. Right, you'd find only people from the upper caste. Same with the Indian media. If you look at media, you'd find that it's the preserve of upper castes. You look at the influencers on social media, you look at the big columnists, you look at the people who control the media infrastructure. Again, it's the same issue, right? So there is a very small percentage of India which is controlling the entire infrastructure. What you're proposing doesn't actually solve that problem.
No, not proposing, I'm just asking.
Yeah, what you're asking doesn't actually solve that problem. That problem is a much broader problem, and it's the first step in understanding that problem is actually in understanding what the reality is. So what is the participation of lower castes, of tribals, of Dalits in, for example, the corporate world? What is the participation in the media? What is the participation in our bureaucracy? The point I made about the secretaries is that if you look at the Indian government, 70 secretaries basically determine the direction of it, right? And I made this point again and again in the election that 90% of India doesn't have representation among those people.
Okay.
No, I wouldn't call it. I wouldn't call it a transformation.
A journey?
Yeah, a journey. I think politics in India changed very dramatically in 2014. We entered a phase of politics that we haven't seen in India before. Aggressive, attacking the foundations of our democratic structure. And so it's a tough fight. It's been a good fight. And personally, of course, it has changed me. I wouldn't have ever imagined before 2014, if you had come to me and said, look, you walk across from Kanyakumari to Kashmir, I would have just laughed at you. And I would have said, that's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. But that was the only way left for the opposition in our country. Media was suppressed, institutions were controlled, agencies were attacking the opposition, governments were being overthrown, and we found that literally the only way was to go directly to the people of India.
Okay.
And that certainly changed me in fundamental ways.
Right.
Not everywhere on the planet has an employment problem. Okay? The West has an employment problem. India has an employment problem. But there are many countries in the world that don't really have an employment problem. China certainly doesn't have an employment problem. Vietnam doesn't have an employment problem. So there are places on the planet that are not struggling with unemployment. There's a reason. If you look at the United States in the 1940s, 50s and 60s, they were the center of global production. Anything that was made, cars, washing machines, TVs, all made in the United States. Production moved from the United States, it went to Korea, it went to Japan, eventually it went to China. And if you look today, China is dominating global production. You go to India, you look at the phones, you look at the furniture, you look at clothes, you'll see on the back, made in China. That's a fact, right? So what has happened? The West, America, Europe, India has given up on the idea of production and they've handed it to China. The act of production creates jobs. What we do, what the Americans do, what the West does, is we organize consumption. Okay? Uber is organizing consumption. Okay? Foxconn is organizing production. Mahindra organizes production. Bajaj organizes production. These are the guys who create the jobs. And that is the problem. You're never going to employ India using IT, using consumption. It's not going to happen. So India has to think about the act of production and organizing production. And India has to, it's not acceptable that India simply says, okay, manufacturing, what you call manufacturing or production is going to be the preserve of the Chinese, it's going to be the preserve of the Vietnamese, it's going to be the preserve of the Bangladeshis. Right? Bangladesh completely outcompetes us in textiles. Regardless of the problems they're facing right now, they wiped us off. They wiped us clean in textiles. Right? So we have to reimagine how to produce in a democratic environment. Until we do that, we will face high levels of unemployment. And frankly, it's not sustainable. So you're going to see that if we carry on down this path of forgetting about manufacturing, you're going to see massive social problems coming in India and in the United States and in Europe, right? The polarization of our politics is because of this.